Hello, listeners, and welcome to Pop Screen, part of the Geek Show podcast network. We are that corner of the Geek Show that likes to look at the good, the bad, and the bewildering of movies, either starring, about, or by pop stars. No, the podcast covers a broad range of musical and cinematic genres, from country and western to hip-hop, from documentaries to science fiction. I'm your host, Graham Williamson. I'm a writer for We Are Cult, Byline Times, Film Stories, and The Geek Show, and I've been joined this week by...
I'm Aidan. Hi. Long-time contributor to the Geek Show. You can find me on Letterboxd under the username Aidan F, and I'm on Twitter as well under the Twitter handle Doco and Drummer.
Indeed. Now, it's a bit of a memorial episode this week, isn't it? We are joined to watch a eulogy for someone who was died that was made 7 years before he died, which is, I mean, it's efficient, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. I don't even know how I can pick up from that, to be perfectly honest with you.
Well, let's just say what it is. Let's just say what it is, because that is an odd way to start. But it's the Ecstasy of Wilko Johnson. It's Julien Temple's film, because we are Pop Screen, the Julien Temple podcast, whether we like it or not.
Do you do like are you going to do a segment for this podcast where you rate every single Julien Temple film you've covered?
I mean, it's worryingly close to reality at this point, because what have we done? We've done Crock of Gold, we've done Man Trap, we've done Absolute Beginners, and the thing with Julien Temple is you can just keep going from there, because seemingly every single one of his movies has some sort of music connection.
Welcome to Pop Screen, where we review everything Julien Temple has done.
It's very niche, isn't it? There are a lot of podcasts that do that, have that kind of ordeal approach, where they just go through the whole of some franchise or someone's career methodically, but only we are stupid enough to do it while also doing a load of other stuff in between.
And it's worth it, because I do quite like Julien Temple's films, to be fair. So
I do, yes.
Hmm.
But this is, I mean, I don't know if I would say it's his best film, possibly not, but I will say when I think of Julien Temple, this is the one that comes through as being the most quintessentially Julien Temple in a lot of ways.
Yes, definitely agree. And because I've seen this before, this is a rewatch that I had to do, because I'd seen the Ecstasy of Wilko Johnson before. I think this was just before I was getting into Dr Feelgood, or when I was, I should say. And it did inform me a lot about the guy. And like as we were saying before, because Wilko Johnson has sadly is no longer with us. So it only makes sense we do an episode tackling this film finally.
Yes, because this was made after Oil City Confidential, which was Temple's first documentary about Dr. Feelgood. And like I say, I talk about this guy being the ultimate pop screen director. When you have someone who's made more than one film about Dr. Feelgood, what more can I say?
Yeah. Well, to be fair, I mean, he's made I can't even remember how many films on the Sex Pistols now, but he has done a couple on them as well, so it's not unheard of.
It's part of the authorist approach to it, though, isn't it? That there are things in Julien Temple's work that just make their way into film after film that he's made. When we did Crock of Gold, it was great seeing Temple's original footage of the Sex Pistols when they started out in there, even though it isn't a Sex Pistols film. And you can spot a lot of his preoccupations running through this as well, although in a strange way, I think Johnson and Temple are probably quite similar people.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, very eccentric. Do you
They've
think?
got that kind of working class autodidact kind of thing going on,
Hmm.
when he starts cutting in clips from Sergio Parajanov films or recreating the Seventh Seal. You think, well, I don't know if that's Johnson coming up with that or whether that's Temple, because it
Yeah,
feels like it could be either man.
and that could backfire spectacularly easily because
Yeah,
if you snipping in snippets of like all these weird world art house films, like as you say, work of Sergei Parajanov, The Seventh Seal. I think Stalker, a clip from Stalker's used as
Lord of
well. The
Tarkovsky. Yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
that could come off as like really pretentious, but I don't know. It sort of works in the film's favor because and I think no less it serves to the power of the story
Yeah,
with what Wilko Johnson was going through at this moment in his life.
yeah, because this was made when he just had a cancer diagnosis, and he was told in no uncertain terms that he had a year left to live. And the first time I think people became aware of this was this extraordinary segment on BBC Breakfast News, which is excerpted in the film.
In here, yeah.
that's, that's like the depths of Temple's cultural palette, Stalker and BBC Breakfast News. He can run the gamut there.
National treasure, Julien Temple.
But
To be fair, I mean,
yeah,
yeah. To be fair, he's Adam Curtis. He's being his most Adam Curtisy here, isn't he?
he is, yeah, and I think that kind of obsessive layering is a very Julian Temple-y thing, because I think it comes from that era of the music press where it's pre-internet. If you want to learn about your favorite artists, buying a copy of Melody Maker or NME is the only thing
Hmm.
that you can resort to. And if your favorite band makes some abstruse reference in their lyrics, and listeners, I was a teenage Manic Street Preachers fan, so this happened to me all the fucking time. They're your only shot. They're the people who decipher it for you. And I think that attitude that rock music in particular is part of high culture, and rock music can be deciphered by looking at, Stalker and the Icelandic sagas and the 17th century metaphysical poet Thomas Traherne. Had to look that one up, listeners, but it's in there. Uh,
It's an
that
obscure
that's
one.
yeah, but that's what Temple does. That's his shtick. That's his thing, right?
Mm. And it's completely enriching stuff as well. So it
Mm,
doesn't like work against the film. It works totally well. Yeah, as
mm.
Graham was saying.
It works particularly well here, and he goes in particularly heavy with it here. And I think part of the reason why it works is that this is not just a film about rock music. This is a film about a man staring down death.
Life and death. Yeah, yeah, definitely.
And when he was on BBC Breakfast, he gave this extraordinary interview, which people still remember today, where he talked about how this knowledge that he had a year left was giving him so much focus and clarity. And ironically, he was enjoying life so much more now that the
Hmm.
sort of the big question of, what am I doing? Where is this going? Is answered in these very cold terms. You are going to die in a year's time. And,
Hmm.
it gave him a sense of joy that people were really fascinated by.
Because it taps into his feelings a lot, doesn't it? This film, and it gives him a voice that to really express that. Because and of course you've got to do that for a man, and you've got to make Wilko Johnson the central focus. Duh, his name's in the title, so it only makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, But there's loads of quotes from him that are really quite inspiring. I mean, one that I noted down: "If it's going to kill me, I don't want it to bore me."
Yes, I noted that down. I was like you on rewatching this. I was reminded that this is basically wall to wall great Wilko Johnson quotes.
Definitely, and he's a character, man. I really did love the dude.
Because for the uninitiated, Dr. Feelgood came about in that kind of it was called pub rock, which I think by the time I was getting into music had become kind of a derisive term, but it was more
Mm.
interesting than that. That there was this kind of grassroots movement in the early 70s before punk of people who wanted to get rock and roll out of the kind of prog concept album space and back
Yeah, yeah.
towards a kind of roots, unpretentious, straight ahead rock and roll.
And you get that from Wilko Johnson's interview here. I think he there's a snippet of him saying that with a sneer in his voice, saying, "I don't like prog music." And he doesn't even use prog rock; he just says prog music.
Yes.
So you definitely get that. It's very sharp in terms of his opinions.
But there is I think like all things that are successfully straight ahead and gut level, there is a degree of sophistication to it anyway. And in Dr. Feelgood's case, that sophistication comes from Wilko Johnson's guitar playing, which is far, far more elaborate than it actually sounds.
Yeah, it's very impressive because
Mm.
I think it's fingerpick style. So, and not in the sense like how Mark Knopfler would fingerpick, but it's like constantly da da dun da 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 dun da 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 dun da. It's like I said before, it's very sharp guitar playing, but you've also got his presence where he's like darting across the stage back and forth. And not
Yes.
in like an Angus Young stance where he's like all over the place. He's like just walking constantly to and fro. You think the guy's insane when you look at him. Uh, because he's just like constantly walking backwards and forwards while staring at you. It's just he had that completely terrifying demeanor to him, and
Oh
it
yeah, I mean,
worked. Yeah,
part of the stage presence that he had is down to the fact that he's a really intimidating looking guy. This sort of bald guy with a skull-like head and really fierce eyes. And of course, in his later years, one of the side hustles that he enjoyed the most was a small part he had as an executioner in Game of Thrones,
in Game
which
of
he
Thrones,
talks
yes.
about in this film. Yeah.
Mm.
Because that character I had had his tongue ripped out. So he said it was great. I didn't have to learn any lines. I just have to glower at people and look mad.
And I'm great at that.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, and yeah. I can't fault him. Well done, Wilco.
yeah. So his whole stage presence is this sort of really interesting mess of opposites. He has this very sophisticated guitar playing style where, as is explained in the documentary, he's basically playing rhythm and lead on the same instrument at the same time.
Yeah,
But if you listen to it, you're not listening to someone show off. You're listening to something that sounds really it sounds as primal and basic as the Stooges, but it's
yeah,
achieved in
yeah.
this remarkably nimble, virtuoso way. You have him running around, you have him looking terrifying, you have the fact that he's a remarkably educated man and an amateur astronomer off camera, and you think, wow,
I just love that.
even before he's in a life or death situation, even before that, what a subject for a documentary.
Hmm, definitely. Yeah, he's an interesting character. He's a great
Mm.
character, and it's just a shame because I don't think we'll ever get another Wilko Johnson like this at all.
Yeah, I,
He was definitely one of a kind.
part of what excites me about him is the class thing that he's this unashamedly intellectual working class guy, and he likes, he drinks and he plays rock and roll, but he also likes reading Icelandic sagas. And part of you just thinks, oh, where is the Wilko Johnson for today? And the answer is probably stacking shelves in Sainsbury's.
Yeah, definitely. It's a sad truth, unfortunately. But then you look at this guy, like I say, with his like stage presence and persona, and he is pretty much Dr. Feelgood, or one of
Mm,
like the key face of it, really, in my eyes. And
yeah,
that's kind of a shame. And I don't really mean that to belittle anyone else in the band, particularly, of course, the other key member of Dr. Feelgood. I think it was Lee Brillo.
Lee Brillo, yeah.
Yeah, he was obviously a great vocalist as well. But there was just something about Johnson, man. that you can definitely tell that he was like a pivotal character
Yeah.
in that band's sound as well.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of fans of Dr. Feelgood and for a lot of fans of Temple, Oil City Confidential is maybe the fan pick 'cause it's more thoroughly about Dr. Feelgood and their history. But part of why I love the Ecstasy of Wilko Johnson is that you can basically show anyone it and it works for them. You do not have to care about pub rock or Dr. Feelgood or music at all, to be honest, in order
Hmm.
to get something out of this movie.
Because it explores this, the subject really, really well, doesn't it? And its
Mm,
themes. It goes from top to bottom, not really a stone's left unturned. I mean, I think my favorite passage of this is when he goes to Japan, and
mm,
he clearly expresses Japan as like this place that he always loves going to, and I don't blame him because Japan's gorgeous.
mm,
Um, but there's one specific memory where he says that, and my favorite bit of it was where he sees like he goes to like this isolated temple in Kyoto, and obviously there's not a single soul there, and obviously he sees snowfall in like the
mm.
mountain range, but also at the moment is like sunlight like beaming off the snowflakes, so it gives this image that it's golden snow pretty much. And
Yeah.
he actually says in like the notes to this in the voiceover that I have to experience this now because if I log this in the back of my memory, I can't just put it in the back of this memory because obviously I'm going to be dead in like a year, so I have to like be in the moment.
Yes. That's the
Um,
bit that always sticks out for me as well. Yeah.
and it's great. It's just a great little tidbit in a film that's full of tidbits like that.
But it's also there's also that moment on the Japanese tour where he's playing a gig over there, and the fans at the end say he's playing a gig and he's completely upfront about the fact that he's dying of cancer. He's announced this tour, saying, this is the most accurately named farewell tour in the history of rock and roll music because I will be dead after this.
Mm,
And the fans are nevertheless screaming, Wilco, we'll see you again, which proves to be a bit prescient, doesn't it?
definitely.
Because quite late on in this documentary, once he's settled and got his affairs in order, there's there's a is it a photographer? A photographer.
It's a photographer, yes.
Yeah,
Charlie Chan is the guy's name. Yeah.
that's it. Yes, yeah. Which, again is another sort of cinema history reference for Temple to throw in. But
Oh, yeah. Don't get me started on that. Listeners, in case you don't know, there is, I think, like a series of Hollywood films from the 30s that had a character called Charlie Chan, and yeah, very racist is all I'm
yeah,
going to
it was,
say.
part of the racist detective fad of the 30s. Yeah, I don't think we're going to see Rian Johnson reviving that one anytime soon.
No, definitely not. No, God.
But yeah, he is a photographer, but he also has like a medical background, and he's taking photos of this gig because he's contracted to do so. But as he does so, he's thinking, if this guy's had that cancer for as long as he says he has, he shouldn't be running around the stage by now.
Definitely. And it's also how Temple frames the interviews as well that I think's much more dynamic. Because
Mm,
when you think of it like a typical music documentary, it's either done like the Asif Kapadia way, where it's done completely all through voiceover,
yeah,
or you do it like I guess on like MTV,
the
where
BBC4
BBC
Friday night
Four or
approach.
behind
Yeah,
behind the scene, behind the music. I mean, sorry, where
yeah,
it's like studio environment, and you have like talking head interviews, pretty much. Yeah.
mm,
Um, Temple, he's a lot more dynamic because with Charlie Chan's interview, he's like interviewed as if he was like photographing a gig, so he's behind like
yeah,
barriers, and it completely taps into like it provides like an interesting little flavor, and there's obviously many interviews like that with say like Wilko Johnson, or another one is with the surgeon who performs like the operation, where it's
mm,
actually done behind the glass, where you see like the tools scattered around, and that's like completely Temple, I
yeah,
think.
yeah. He's very fond of these. these interviews that have a sense of reality, and in the examples you've quoted, those are people who were standing in the environments that they will be in
Mhm,
order to perform their jobs. But there's also something really artificial about them, which I like. I mean, the one that stuck out for me is when he wants Wilko to like really delve back into his memory, into like the early days of Dr. Feelgood and
mhm,
growing up on Canvey Island, anything like that. He has him in this tiny old projection room with a load of like 16mm film cams all around, and the sunlight
mhm,
shining through a fan in the wall. And it's exactly the sort of location where you just expect that at the end of it, Alex Cox is going to come on and go, so can you move on for a bit? I've got an early 90s movie drome intro to record on this set. Um, it's kind of dated, I guess, but when you compare it to like how a lot of BBC4 or Netflix documentaries work, where you've just got someone sat in front of a photographer's backdrop, it's tons better.
mm. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so that's a lot of fun. And I think also part of what is interesting to me about Temple now, as opposed to what was interesting about Temple when he started, is that he has taken this part of moving image culture that is not supposed to be high art and turned it into a vehicle for his own themes and concerns. Like music documentaries get made because there's a big nostalgia market and there are TV channels that seem to show nothing but this kind of thing. You
Mhm,
know, it's not supposed to be where an artist works, but part of being an artist, I think, is being able to spot a sort of crack in the wall that no one else has noticed and sort of getting your concerns through there.
mm. Yeah, I definitely agree because you can flick through like the artists that you love and say, okay, I need to do more background research, which is what I constantly do for Pop Screen, by the way. And
Yeah,
then just
yeah,
cherry pick like documentaries just so you can like gain some more information about them, or like see. And if they are done in like an artistful way, you just come to love them even more. I quote like Montage of Heck, which does for
yeah.
me, you know. So no, yeah, I completely agree. And like I say, Temple has that in his stride. He knows that, so why not do like a bajillion of these films and then just, and people can like go through the catalog completely.
I think my only complaint about him is that he's probably done every single music artist there is now, and you know it's harder for directors getting a start who want to work in this field because every single artist you can think of has already had a Julien Temple documentary about them.
And you can't take that away from the guy at all.
No, absolutely not. But yeah, it's funny because I had, like you, I'd seen it before. I saw it a few years back. I saw it when we were doing Cinema Eclectica. I reviewed it for Cinema Eclectica
Hmm.
one time, and it's funny the bits of it that stick out in your head. Yes, that uh, that anecdote about the snow in Japan, absolutely. The Parajanov stuff really stuck out because it's like some of the other stuff. I can imagine someone else dressing up Wilko Johnson as the Grim Reaper in the Seventh Seal as part of a laugh because that image is just part of pop cultural currency now. But
Hmm.
bringing in Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors, that's what you turn to Julien Temple to do. That's his
Hmm.
terrain.
Hmm. Yeah. And like I say, it's like a completely enriching experience because you notice like all these different visual ticks that are just completely temples. I mean, I remember
Yeah.
like a bit in I believe it's like Oil City Confidential, where because which is the other like Julian one of the other Julian Temple films that I've seen,
Mm,
um, where he like demonstrates like the band's like road trips, but he gets a little map out and then has like little chess pieces with flags on them saying all the different places that Dr. Feelgood have toured, like Canvey Island, like London, Birmingham, things like that. So he knows how to use it to his advantage.
How did I must admit I only know Oil City Confidential by reputation. How did you feel that there was any repetition between the two films?
No, that's a good question. I think they're both good companion pieces because, as you were saying before, Oil City Confidential's purely on Dr. Feelgood, which is
Mm,
understandable. Um, Whereas this is going not necessarily as an expansion, but it's more like expanding on the character of Wilko Johnson as a human being, really.
mm.
So it's going as a completely different angle. So I guess the two work as a duology, one as like a unit that is demonstrating like I guess not necessarily rise and fall of a band, but like a band's biography,
Yeah.
with all these Temple-esque like ticks and qualms to it, and the other is like a completely desolate exploration. So it's two distinct sides of a coin, I think.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I think when we talk about franchises in cinema, people rarely talk about documentaries, but there are a lot of documentaries that get sequels, and it's normally just because fate throws some other incident their way. Like Nick Broomfield's made a ton of follow-ups to a lot of his best-known films, and normally it's because somebody in them did another murder or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Hmm.
but this is a really beautiful one, and I wasn't sure whether the knowledge that Johnson had now died was going to cast a pall over my rewatch of it, but it didn't. I still found it a really life-affirming film.
Yeah, because it is his character at the end of the day.
Mm,
He wouldn't really want anyone to. Well, of course, him passing away is a very sad thing, but he wouldn't want to like overburden it over his fans because naturally it is part of life. Uh,
yeah.
so and you don't need to be told that because it's like the whole gamut of the universe revolt. Well, not maybe not the whole gamut. I'm sorry to be this morbid, listeners, but um, but you know what I mean? It taps into that theme. So,
Yeah.
it's a completely human thing that we all relate to. And for Johnson to go through and be like incredibly life affirming about it, with still a spring in his step, is just lovely to see, really.
And he's someone who had, by his own admission, always suffered from depression. And in his case, it made him quite conscientious
Mm,
about not sort of palming that off on anyone else. He thought if he was in a bad mood, he wanted to just sort of work through it himself. I
mm,
watched a little interview he did with a YouTube channel that talks about like guitar effects, and
mm.
a lot of it's techie stuff, but it struck me that in the 6-minute interview, he does it with Chaz Jankel sat next to him. Chaz Jankel, who became famous as the bassist for the Blockheads and is
Oh,
now
yes, yeah.
later was in Wilko Johnson's backing band. You can see him a few times in this
Mm,
film. But he
mhm.
sat there with Chaz Jankel, who also has this amazing face, sort of like a Victorian Mr. Punch puppet.
Yes!
And and it's Wilco's interview about his guitar equipment. It's about his playing, and he spends half of that short video just talking about how great Chaz Jankel is.
Definitely. And yeah, great little backing band he had in the latter
Mm,
half of his career. I've forgotten who did the drums, but I'll have to Google it in a minute.
yeah, I don't remember that either, I'm afraid.
Hmm. But back onto this, obviously, like Johnson's late period career is interesting to say the least because he was doing obviously a lot of like cover material for Dr. Feelgood. He was doing some originals as well, spiced in, and obviously when he was dying, he also did a collaboration album with Roger Daltrey, which is tapped into this, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, that was going to be his last. Well, not his last statement. I don't think he wanted to have anything as heavy as that hanging over the album, but he wanted it to be like the farewell party for his
Hmm.
career. And it was a massive hit, a bigger hit than any solo album he'd ever put out.
Which is weird, considering that would be the one. But no, I think it was like just some full synchronized. Look, we've been talking about doing an album together for years, Roger. Do you want to finally do it now that I'm just dying? And just
Yeah,
like, yeah, sure, let's do it.
maybe it isn't that odd. I mean, Death's always sold albums as far back as, Buddy Holly and Bobby Fuller and the Big Bopper, but,
Hmm.
it is a beautiful late moment for him to have this moment of sudden transcendent commercial success with a final album that
Hmm.
turned out to be not at all final. I wonder if anyone ever took it back to the shops to complain that, we were promised Wilko Johnson's final album and then he went and lived.
So it wasn't all that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's um because, like I said, the pancreatic cancer that Wilko Johnson had was very rare,
Yeah.
very very rare. I can't remember what exactly uh the type it was, but pretty much, obviously, it's documented here quite nicely, not in a gratuitous way, just more in like that aspect that you would think, just to state like the hard facts, really.
Mm.
And it just works. It just completely works, and Johnson and Temple don't dwell on that too much. I think it's a nice little balance that they achieve together.
Yeah, I think it's quite about it's quite heavily about the sort of emotional and existential quality of having this hanging over your head until the end when there is this sort of sudden moment of God, and you almost, in the context, it's quite elating because you are watching them absolutely fuck up that cancer.
Yeah, definitely. And you can see the humor of it, because I think there's like a stage show where Roger Daltrey's recounting giving the names to the tumor. I think one time he calls him Frank or like George or something like that.
Well, the golden example of that is, of course, Dennis Potter, who in his last months decided to name the cancer that was killing him after Rupert Murdoch.
Like this terrifying lump that's growing inside you. I can't even think of anything like more scary, really. Real David Cronenberg shit.
It is, isn't it? Yeah. But what one of the things about Cronenberg is that he's quite unemotional about that stuff. He knows it freaks other people out and he knows that's something he can make work in a horror film, but when you hear him talk in interviews, he will say, I just find it fascinating. It's like mechanics to me, the way the human body works.
Hmm,
It's
hmm.
There's no
Yeah.
terror in it. And I sort of I could understand a bit of that when I was watching the surgery scenes in this because I'm just fascinated as to how this apparent total death sentence ended up just they say something like it just sort of peeled away like an orange. It was
Hmm.
like
Yeah.
the cancer is kind of a living thing, and as soon as they'd got it off most of his organs, the last thing they had to get off was his heart, which is the really risky one because obviously one slip of the scalpel and
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
dead.
Yeah. Bad. Yeah.
But it was like as soon as they'd got it off most of his organs, it just gave up. The thing that was supposed to happen to Wilko Johnson happened to his tumour, that it just sort of rolled over and thought, oh, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah. And then yeah. Bye. Yeah.
Yeah,
And look at where we are now. And Wilco Johnson ended up living for a few more years after that, which is like
yeah,
wonderful.
best
It's a
part of a decade. Yeah,
wonderful story to hear. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, it's almost quite hard to talk about it because this kind of film from Temple analyzes itself more than more than you can.
Hmm. Yeah, and that comes down to purely how the film's uh, style and at the very film's
Yeah,
call, because it's very deep cut. It goes into like the obscure bits, like I say, like Wilko Johnson's love for Icelandic poetry. Um, my favorite bit is the fact that he's digging through, and he used to be an English teacher. Can you imagine Wilko Johnson as an English teacher?
it's up there with Ian Curtis's time as a benefits office worker as one of the most unlikely pre-rock and roll careers, really, isn't it?
It's really odd, but that just comes to show how much of a colourful life he's had. If
Yeah.
anything, yeah, it completely taps into that zeitgeist. Yeah, it's wonderful.
Yeah, and when I speak about Johnson and Temple being in sync, part of it is that Temple is an incredibly literate man who is also capable of being extremely dumb and enjoying it. And
Hmm.
I think I can picture many other directors making a video essay that reworks material from Andrei Tarkovsky's Stalker to tell a story about a man facing cancer. I cannot imagine any other director also including an insert of a toy lobster singing Shaking All Over.
Yep, very eccentric, like as I was saying before. Very eccentric taste. It's a little bit weird once you get the hang of it, but once you get, like I say, once you get the hang of it, you can totally accept it being like Julien Temple style.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, any further thoughts before we close off? Any thoughts on Johnson himself? Because I must admit, I'm not a huge Dr. Feelgood fan.
Hmm.
Rather like sort of like I am with some bands I talk about. I guess I don't dislike them. I've just never had that moment where
Hmm.
I've really dived in.
Because the lovely thing is that I actually, and I don't mean this to obviously like blow my own trumpet or anything like this, but a few years back I actually did see Wilko Johnson live.
Oh, fabulous!
And it was lovely because it was like a 5 minute walk from where I was staying at because I was like studying my MA at the time. So, and the gig was only like a 5 minute walk from where I was staying. So it was just like, great gig, like 5 minute walk. I'll go. And it was a fun night. I've got to admit, it was like a really great, lovely night just to see him. Like, and this was like after obviously he had the cancer surgery. So
Yeah,
obviously that wasn't really on his mind anymore at the time. But it was just a fun gig, and it just comes to show like how enriching this experience is just to see him as a character, and I'll always have that appreciate it. You know, now that is sadly no longer with us, that I did actually manage to catch him before, obviously that.
it's nice that he had. I mean, he always had a very strong cult following, and I think if you were going to do a more conventional music documentary about the sort of ups and downs of Wilko Johnson's career, you would be a bit stuck because
Mm,
there haven't really been peaks and troughs. He's been going on at roughly the same level of
yeah.
like acclaim since the early 70s, but it was nice that he had that moment before his death, which just prompted so many people to just say how much they loved his music and to value him while he was here, to value him as much as he came to value his life, really.
Definitely agree. I think if you want to get into Dr. Feelgood, the live album Stupidity is a great pick to get interested in, because like a lot of things, like a lot of live records, I think live music it can really give you a sense of what the artist in question is like.
Mm.
And Stupidity is a great pick because like they just like burst through each and every song on the set list, and it's just there's a lot of energy to it that I really do love.
I mean, when we talk about sort of Wilko Johnson as a guy who's smart enough to understand the appeal of sort of heads down, basic, dirty, dumb music, calling a live album Stupidity is kind of the apex of that, isn't it?
It's wonderful, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and that's why I kind of love the dude so much.
Yeah. So if you enjoyed that, we put a bonus episode out on our Patreon every month, where you can also find Rob's reviews of Asian films, my Doctor Who reviews, and much more. That's at www.patreon.com/The Geek Show. But until then, I've been Graham,
And I've been Aidan.
and we'll see you in a fortnight with more Pop Screen.